Hello, all you beautiful beings out there. I'm Samantha, and this is a Sage Witch Mooncast. Because I have a good number of new followers, as well as this is kind of a new adventure for me, I thought I would take some time to tell you a little bit about myself. I live on a farm in the majestic Pacific Northwest with my husband, son, 2.5 cats, a dog, and a flock of chickens. I say 2.5 cats because we are currently kitty sitting our daughter's cat as she settles into her new home and life as a working college student. I am a stay-at-home mom, and I homeschool our 12-year-old son. I don't usually talk too much about my children on social media as I'm trying to respect their privacy and anonymity. But I will say they are fire and ice. Our daughter was born during a snowstorm and our son during a heat wave. Our daughter is all but grown up, and I leave what is shared about her publicly to her. Our son is, as I said, 12 and also on the spectrum, which is one reason we chose to homeschool him. I realized that being open on social media is a pretty common thing these days, but I want our son to be able to choose how and what he shares about himself when he's ready and can understand just what it all means. My husband, who I usually refer to as lover on social media, and I met in the 7th grade. I didn't realize just how important he was to me until one day he all but vanished from my life. It wasn't until 7 years later, through the magic of social media, that I found him again. He was sent to live in Tennessee when he was a teenager. 2 months to the day after contacting him, he sold pretty much everything he owned and traveled 3,000 miles across this country back to his home and landed here on the day of the autumn equinox. 1 year later, again, to the day, we were married and have been inseparable ever since. Funny thing, I'm a Virgo and he's an Aquarius. On the day of our wedding, the sun was in Virgo and the moon was in Aquarius. And we were married almost down to the minute of the equinox. Tell me that's not at least a little auspicious. So that is my little tribe. I have worn many hats in my life. I've been a certified welder, and after an injury, I was unable to continue in that field, so I earned my bachelor's degree in health and wellness. There's one thing I always wanted to be, though, and that was a professional witch. I always dreamed about owning a little coffee house where people could come and sit down and read witchcraft books and have a good coffee, and maybe someday that'll happen. But I wanted to write books and just do all-around witchy things and teach people. And since 2020 and the beginning of the pandemic, I had a lot of time to really delve into this idea. And I'm happy to say that I'm finally fulfilling and realizing that dream. It's pretty exciting. So I consider myself to be something of a minimalist. I know. It's a pretty big buzzword these days, right along or up there with mindfulness. But minimalism and mindfulness are things that have really helped me find peace in my life. And if you're not a minimalist, that's okay too. It's just what works for me. No judgment here. But having grown up with the generational trauma of poverty, these things have really been a balm to my soul. My grandmother lived during the Great Depression in America, and throwing things away was something of a taboo. This idea was, of course, passed down to my mother and ultimately to me. "You might need it later" was a mantra. It took me a long time and some very hard work to overcome this mindset. I have studied and tried out more paths of witchcraft than I can even remember. While some of them came close, none of them really fulfilled me spiritually. Growing up, I was loosely raised Christian, like many of you, by my mother, but also found that just did not hit home with me either. It just didn't speak to my soul, and I sought out to find the spiritual path for me. This actually began at a very young age. I can recall a specific moment in my life when I was about 6 years old that I heard the voice of nature on the wind. It was just something that spoke to my soul, and I haven't forgotten that day. When I was 12, I, without knowing it, erected my first altar. It was simply a candle, mirror, and an incense holder. Every day after school, I would come home, light my candle and my incense, put on my gigantic 90s headphones, and spend a few moments debuffering from the day and connecting to my inner self. This is something that I would do for a very long time, minus the giant headphones now. My father, however, was not a religious person, but in fact a very spiritual one. His spirit lied in the sciences. I can recall one evening when he was studying astronomy at our local university, and he took me with him to look through the university's massive telescope. And there, for the very first time, I saw the moon. Like I really saw the moon. I stared through that lens for as long as I was allowed, until tears were streaming down my face from the bright light reflecting from the moon. That moment changed me forever, and I am eternally grateful for it. As I said, throughout my life, I studied every spiritual path and religion I could. I studied Judaism, Buddhism, Taoism, and just so many more. I'm reminded of the Cosmos episode where Neil deGrasse Tyson tells a story of Giordano Bruno. Bruno was a 16th century friar, and essentially his beef with the church was that their God was too small. That sentiment echoes how I feel about most spiritual paths I studied. I felt God or the creative forces of the universe were just too grand to be put in a palatable box to be defined. I was left wanting and searching for deeper meaning. So even though I was making altars and working with herbs and crystals, I still wasn't aware of the witchcraft community on this planet. Now, mind you, I grew up in the pre-internet times, so any knowledge I had came from hours of scouring our local library for books on the subject. It wasn't until I was in college and met a real-life witch that I understood that I was a witch. I'd like to think my perspective on witchcraft is unique. At least I haven't found too many people or books that echo my ideas. My path is a holistic one, and it doesn't ignore one dimension of myself for another. What can I say? My feet are firmly planted on the ground as I reach for the stars. It is, dare I say, practical, and some might find that boring. But I use witchcraft to better myself and others, should they ask. I use my witchcraft to heal and to reach my highest potential. I also consider myself something of an animist and an omnist. I believe that each and every being, though shares the same source, has its own unique energy. As a witch, I seek to understand these differences in energy as well as their source. I seek to live in harmony with the cycles of nature. I do not typically include any one god, goddess, or pantheon in my path. I do understand, though, that these archetypes have lessons to teach us, and on occasion I'll align myself with different gods and goddesses from the Nordic pantheon. In the end, I do my best to live in harmony with the cycles of nature. That's kind of the end all for me. I love the earth, and whether or not I like or agree with someone, I love everyone as an expression of that source. My goal in this life, at least one of them, is to leave as little a footprint as I can on this planet during my time here. I make a lot of my own cleaning products and self-care products, and am always trying to find ways to consume less and to be happy with less. But I am far from perfect in this, and I probably will never be perfect in this, and that's okay. But as the old saying goes, I am only one, but I am one. I cannot do everything, but I can do something. So, in a very small nutshell, that's who I am. Otherwise, I'm a pretty typical person. At least I think so. I spend my days teaching our son and baking and cooking. I do love making good food. Gardening, growing food, being outside and playing music. And of course, spending time with my little tribe. But we're rarely so limited in who we are and what we do, aren't we? And frankly, it varies from moment to moment. So thank you once again for joining me on the Mooncast. I'm going to go out on a limb and have decided to try, and I do mean try, to do one podcast a week and to post them on Fridays. Next week's podcast, I'll be talking about the function and meaning of altars, and I hope you can join me then. If you want to keep updated on new podcasts, feel free to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at The Sage Witch, or you can also subscribe to my website at thesagewitch.wordpress.com. Thank you once again for joining me, and I wish you all the best of the seasons.